The gavel struck with a sharp crack that echoed through the crowded courtroom, silencing the whispers that had filled the air only seconds before. The oak-paneled walls, heavy with the weight of judgment, seemed to lean in as if the building itself wanted to see how the drama would unfold. At the center of it all stood Daniel Hayes, a single father, his shoulders squared but his eyes betraying the exhaustion of years lived harder than most men could endure. He wasn't in uniform anymore. No ribbons on his chest. No stripes on his sleeve. But everything about him still carried the quiet discipline of a soldier who had seen the battlefield. Across the bench sat Judge Richard Colton, a man whose reputation for arrogance was known far beyond the courtroom. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the edges of his lips as he eyed Daniel. "Mr. Hayes," the judge said, his voice slick with condescension, "this isn't a military camp. We don't salute here. Do try to remember that." A ripple of laughter rose from the gallery. Daniel didn't flinch. His jaw tightened, his hands remained steady, resting on the battered briefcase he had brought with him. Inside it were not the weapons of war, but the documents, files, and research he had poured himself into for weeks. Because this wasn't just any hearing. This was the day he would fight for his son. The opposing counsel, a polished attorney in a $1,000 suit, glanced at Daniel with a look of easy dismissal. To them, he was just a veteran-turned-janitor, a man scraping by, standing alone without a lawyer. Easy prey. But what no one in that courtroom knew. Not the smirking judge. Not the dismissive attorney. Not even the onlookers waiting for a spectacle. Was that Daniel Hayes carried a secret. Beneath the quiet humility of a working man and the scars of a soldier lay a mind sharpened like a blade. A man who had spent endless nights studying not just for survival, but for mastery. The bailiff called for order. Daniel rose, his movements deliberate, his eyes lifting toward the bench. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but edged with an authority that seemed out of place for someone representing himself. "I'm here for one reason. My son. And I intend to prove the truth." The judge chuckled softly, shaking his head. "We'll see how long that resolve lasts. Proceed, if you must." The first witness was called. The child's mother, Rebecca, whose bitterness toward Daniel colored every word she spoke. She painted him as unstable, unfit, a man whose military past left him broken and incapable of raising their boy. Her attorney emphasized every accusation with the precision of a man certain victory was already his. Daniel sighed in silence, his face unreadable, his eyes fixed on the papers before him. But when the time came for cross-examination, something shifted in the room. He rose slowly, carrying only a yellow notepad and a single pen. The laughter that had flickered earlier seemed to falter, replaced by a tension no one expected. "Ms. Reynolds," Daniel began, his tone measured, his posture relaxed. "You've stated that I'm unstable. Could you explain to the court the exact nature of your psychological expertise?" Rebecca hesitated, glancing nervously at her attorney. I'm not a psychologist. I just know what I've seen," Daniel nodded. "So, no formal training. No certifications. Just personal opinion." The attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection, he's badgering the witness." But Daniel was quicker. "Objection noted, Your Honor. But I'm simply clarifying the foundation of her testimony. Under Rule 7001 of the Federal Rules of Evidence, lay witness opinions are limited to perceptions, not diagnoses. Unless she's certified, her testimony on my mental stability is inadmissible." A stunned silence filled the room. Even the judge's smirk faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise. The attorney sat down, his objection dying in his throat. Rebecca fumbled, her words growing weaker under Daniel's calm, but relentless questioning. With every answer, he guided her into contradictions, exposing bitterness rather than truth. What had begun as an attack on his character unraveled into a portrait of resentment and personal vendetta. By the time Daniel sat down, the courtroom had shifted. The spectators leaned forward, whispers replaced by wide-eyed astonishment. The judge's fingers tapped the gavel, not in command, but in a nervous rhythm against the wood. Daniel's son, seated quietly at the back with a guardian, glanced at his father. For the first time in weeks, there was a spark of pride in his young eyes. But the battle was only beginning. The opposing counsel shuffled papers with a newfound urgency, realizing that the man they had underestimated was far from helpless. The judge, though still cloaked in arrogance, studied Daniel differently now. Less like an annoyance, more like a threat to his control. And Daniel, he sat back down, calm and steady, as if the courtroom were just another battlefield. The war was far from over, but he had just fired the first unexpected shot. The air in the courtroom was different now. What began as an easy win for the polished attorney had turned into a contest of wits neither he nor the judge had anticipated. Daniel sat upright. Not with arrogance but with a quiet confidence that unsettled those across from him. The attorney cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Your Honor, the defense may have caught my client off guard, but will soon prove beyond doubt that Mr. Hayes is unfit. The judge leaned forward, masking his earlier surprise with a dismissive smile. Proceed, Counselor. Let's see what you have. The next witness was called. A social worker who had conducted a home visit at Daniel's modest apartment. She described peeling paint, a small refrigerator with little inside, and the absence of luxuries most families take for granted. To her, this was proof that Daniel couldn't provide a stable home. Mr. Hayes. The attorney sneered, is it true your son has no private bedroom in your apartment? Daniel rose, his face calm. That's true, we live in a small 2-bedroom. He shares a space with me. The attorney pounced. So you admit you can't even provide the basics? A child needs privacy, stability. Isn't it true your financial instability makes you unfit to raise him? Whispers rippled through the gallery. Daniel paused, then looked at the judge, his voice steady. Your Honor, may I cross-examine the witness? The judge gave a begrudging nod. Daniel approached the stand. Ms. Carter, when you visited my apartment, did you see whether my son had clean clothes? Wes. Food in the fridge, even if modest. Wes. Books, school supplies, and his drawings on the walls. She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. Daniel's tone sharpened, each word deliberate. Would you agree that love, safety, and involvement in a child's life outweighed the square footage of a bedroom? The attorney jumped up. Objection. Argumentative. But before the judge could respond, Daniel spoke again, citing case law he had memorized late at night at his kitchen table. Your Honor, in Troxel v. Granville and numerous other custody cases, the Supreme Court has recognized a parent's fundamental right to direct their child's upbringing. Material wealth is not the measure of fitness. Stability is. The judge froze, his expression unreadable. He had expected blunders, not precedents quoted flawlessly by a man with no law degree. The gallery stirred again, this time with murmurs of admiration. Daniel continued, locking eyes with the social worker. Ms. Carter, during your visit, did my son seem loved? She swallowed. Yes, he did. Did he appear afraid, neglected, or unsafe? No. Thank you. He turned and walked back to his table, leaving silence in his wake. The attorney's confidence was slipping fast. His papers rustled as his hands shook, but trying to find footing. But Daniel sat down calmly, adjusting his notepad, every movement purposeful, every detail controlled. At the back of the room, Daniel's son clutched the arm of the guardian beside him, eyes shining. For a boy who had seen his father mocked, dismissed, and nearly broken, this was a moment of quiet triumph. But Judge Colton wasn't ready to yield. He leaned forward, narrowing his eyes. Mr. Hayes, where exactly did you learn to recite case law? Watching late-night television. The courtroom chuckled again, but Daniel didn't smile. No, Your Honor. I learned the same way I learned to survive in war. Discipline. Study. I don't have a law degree, but I've read every statute, every precedent I could find. Because my son deserves a father who fights with everything he has. The words hit harder than the judge expected. His gavel hovered but didn't strike. For a brief moment, something in his expression cracked. A flicker of unease, maybe even guilt, but he quickly masked it. Very well. Colton said, his voice clipped. We'll see how long you can keep this up. The opposing counsel regrouped, and tried a new tactic, pressing financial records, showing Daniel's meager income as a janitor. They painted him as a man destined to fail, unable to provide opportunities his son deserved. The attorney's voice grew bolder again, sensing leverage. Tell us, Mr. Hayes. The lawyer said, pacing before the jury box, how will you afford your son's future? His education, his medical needs. You can barely afford rent. Daniel let the words hang for a moment. Then, standing tall, he spoke with quiet force. I may not be rich, but I know sacrifice. I know what it means to give everything you have for someone else. I gave my youth, my health, my years of service for this country, and I'll give every remaining breath for my son. Money can buy comfort, but it can't buy devotion. The courtroom fell silent. Even those who had snickered earlier leaned forward now, caught in the gravity of his words. The judge shifted uneasily in his seat. He had mocked Daniel at the start, sure of his weakness. But the man standing before him wasn't weak. He was dangerous. Not in the way of violence, but in the way of truth wielded with unwavering conviction. And for the first time, Judge Colton realized this was not going to be a simple case. The afternoon sun poured through the tall courthouse windows, casting golden beams across the floor, yet the atmosphere inside remained heavy, thick with anticipation. Every eye followed Daniel Hayes as he returned to his seat, and every whispered breath seemed to ask the same question. Who exactly is this man? The opposing attorney wasn't done. His jaw clenched as he shuffled through more documents. He had underestimated Daniel twice now, and the embarrassment was eating at him. This was supposed to be routine: a single dad, broken alone, squaring off against a practiced litigator and a smug judge. But somehow, this janitor, veteran, was dismantling their case, one piece at a time. Your Honor, the attorney began, his voice a little too sharp. I'd like to introduce new evidence into the record. Financial records, hospital reports, and employment evaluations, demonstrating Mr. Hayes's inability to sustain adequate stability. Daniel's eyes flicked toward the thick binder of documents being handed over. He knew what was inside. He had spent sleepless nights preparing for it. Every late payment, every medical bill from his injuries overseas, every job rejection. Laid out in black and white, a story twisted into proof of failure. The judge flipped through the papers, his lips curling into that familiar smirk. Quite a record you've built, Mr. Hayes. Debts, unstable employment, injuries. You're asking this court to believe that you, of all people, are the best guardian for a child. A few chuckles stirred from the back benches. Daniel remained still. He had heard worse on the battlefield, and worse in the silence of empty nights, when his son was asleep and doubts consumed him. Slowly, he stood, adjusting his tie, and walked toward the bench. Your Honor, may I speak to this evidence? By all means, Colton said, leaning back like a cat waiting to toy with its prey. Daniel picked up the binder. His hands didn't shake. His voice didn't falter. These debts you see. They're not the result of recklessness. They're the cost of surgeries after shrapnel tore into my leg in Kandahar. They're the hospital bills from nights I could have died. Nights I fought to come home alive for my son. The courtroom hushed. Even the attorney stopped fidgeting with his tie. These gaps in employment. They aren't laziness. They're the months I spent learning how to walk again, when every step felt like a knife cutting into my body. They're the jobs I applied for and was turned away from. Not because I lacked ability, but because some employers look at a veteran with scars and see only a liability. He flipped the pages, letting the sound of rustling paper echo. So yes, this binder shows struggle. But it also shows resilience. Every obstacle you see written here, I've overcome. Not for myself, for him. He pointed gently toward the boy seated at the back. For my son. The silence was heavy, almost reverent. The spectators weren't whispering now, they were listening. Truly listening. Daniel's voice lowered, but its strength only deepened. I stand here without a lawyer, without wealth, without prestige. But I stand here with truth. And truth, Your Honor, doesn't need a polished briefcase or a corner office. It only needs someone willing to fight for it. The judge shifted in his seat, visibly unsettled, though he masked it with a scoff. Moving words, Mr. Hayes. But this isn't a movie. Courts don't run on sentiment. Daniel didn't back down. No, Your Honor, they run on law. And the law is clear. Parental rights aren't stripped because someone is poor. They're stripped when a parent is dangerous, negligent, or unfit. And there's no evidence, none, that I have ever harmed my son. He is fed, clothed, safe and loved, which by law is all that is required. The attorney tried to interject, but his voice cracked. Your Honor, the point remains. Mr. Hayes cannot provide the opportunities. Daniel turned sharply, his eyes burning with intensity. Opportunities. I fought for this country so he could have opportunities. And I'll continue fighting here, in this court, against anyone who dares to say my love isn't enough. The gallery erupted in murmurs, this time not mocking, but awestruck. Some nodded. Some even clapped softly before the bailiff barked for order. Daniel returned to his seat, his son's eyes never leaving him. The boy looked at his father not just with admiration, but with a kind of relief, as though for the first time, he believed they might actually win. But the storm wasn't over. Judge Colton leaned forward, his voice colder now, stripped of humor. You're clever, Mr. Hayes. I'll give you that. But clever doesn't change facts. And the fact is, you are a single man, with limited income, facing years of hardship. Are you truly prepared to claim that your son's best chance is with you, and not with his mother who can provide stability? The words hung heavy. This was the pivot, the fulcrum upon which the case could tilt. The judge was forcing Daniel into a corner, pressing him not with law, but with perception. Daniel inhaled slowly. His eyes met the judge's unblinking. Yes, Your Honor. Because stability isn't about a paycheck. It's about presence. When he wakes from a nightmare, I'm there. When he has a fever, I'm the one holding his hand through the night. When he falls, I'm the one lifting him back up. His mother may offer more things, but I offer myself, and no amount of wealth replaces that. The courtroom went still again. Even Judge Culkin, so quick with mockery, seemed at a loss for words. And in that moment, Daniel's quiet truth echoed louder than any gavel could strike. The courtroom lights seemed harsher as the afternoon bled into evening. The walls felt closer, the silence sharper, and every glance was fixed on Daniel Hayes. By now, no one saw him as a janitor fumbling through an impossible case. He had become something else entirely. An unexpected force reshaping the rhythm of the trial. The opposing attorney, red-faced and rattled, stood abruptly. His pride demanded retaliation. Your Honor, I request permission to call an additional witness. A character reference. Judge Colton nodded, eager to regain the courtroom's balance. Proceed. The heavy wooden door creaked, and in walked Captain Ronald Pierce, Daniel's former commanding officer. He carried himself with stiff authority, medals gleaming even in civilian attire. Rebecca's attorney smiled with confidence. This was the ace up his sleeve, Captain Pierce. The lawyer began. You served with Mr. Hayes overseas, correct? Less. And during that time, did you observe concerning behavior? Signs of instability. Anger issues, perhaps. Pierce's voice was steady, cutting the air with precision. Yes. I observed that Daniel Hayes carried the weight of every mission on his shoulders. He pushed himself harder than anyone else. He was stubborn, reckless at times. Always putting himself in danger for others. That kind of intensity doesn't just disappear. The attorney smirked. So you would say he's unstable. Pierce hesitated, then said firmly, yes. Unstable in the sense that he'd sacrifice his own life before anyone else's. A dangerous habit for a soldier, and maybe for a father. The courtroom buzzed. Rebecca's lips curled into a triumphant smile. Daniel sat motionless, absorbing every word, his son's eyes darting between him and the stern captain. The attorney leaned closer, voice dripping with satisfaction. So, in your professional opinion, Mr. Hayes is not fit to raise his son. Daniel rose suddenly. Objection, Your Honor. The judge raised a brow. On what grounds? Daniel's voice carried a calm fire. Opinion testimony is not admissible unless the witness is qualified as an expert under Rule 7(2). Captain Pierce is not a psychologist, nor a social worker. His statement about my fitness is nothing more than personal opinion. The judge hesitated, lips tightening. Sustained. The attorney's victory soared instantly. But Daniel wasn't done. He stepped forward, his gaze steady on his former captain. Permission to cross, Your Honor. Granted. Daniel approached slowly, each step deliberate. Captain Pierce. Do you remember Operation Iron Ridge? Pierce stiffened. Yes. Do you remember when the Humvee struck an IED, and 3 of our men were pinned down under fire? The room was silent. Breathless. Pierce's jaw tightened. Yes. Daniel's voice was quieter now, but cutting. Do you remember who ran into the open, under fire, dragged 2 men to safety, and shielded the 3rd with his own body until reinforcements arrived? Pierce's eyes dropped. You did. Daniel nodded. And do you remember what you said afterward? When I was in the hospital bed, patched with 30 stitches. Pierce's voice cracked, just barely. I said you were the bravest man I'd ever commanded. The courtroom stirred. Whispers like waves. Daniel's son leaned forward, pride lighting his face. Daniel stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Pierce's. Captain, you're right. I was reckless with my own safety, but not because of instability. Because I value lives. Every life. Especially my son's. Do you believe I would ever put him in danger? Pierce's lips trembled, torn between loyalty and truth. Finally, he said, no. I don't believe you would. Thank you. Daniel turned, walking back to his seat. The attorney scrambled, his case unraveling with every exchange. But Judge Colton, unsettled by Daniel's composure, tried once more to reassert control. He leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. Mr. Hayes, your speeches are impressive. But the law requires more than passion. It requires proof. Where is the evidence that you can provide for this child beyond words and memories? Daniel's eyes darkened with determination. He reached into his worn briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, neatly bound, edges creased from constant handling. He placed them on the bench. "These," he said firmly, "are my son's grades. His teacher's letters, his doctor's reports. Every one of them attests to his well-being. He is thriving, because I am there. Every night, every morning, every moment in between." He placed another file beside it. "And this is a record of the vocational classes I've been taking at night after work. I may clean floors now, but I'm earning my certification in electrical work. I'm building a future. Not for me, but for him." The courtroom murmured louder now, but not with doubt. With awe. Colton's smirk had vanished. For the first time, he looked unsettled. Not by law, but by the raw, undeniable force of a father's devotion laid bare in front of him. Daniel sat down slowly, the weight of years visible in the set of his shoulders. He had fought wars abroad, but none as brutal as this one in a room of polished wood and whispered judgment. And though the trial was far from over, the balance had shifted. Everyone in that courtroom could feel it. The tide was turning. The courthouse lights flickered softly as the long day dragged into evening. Tension thickened the air, a storm pressing against the walls. Everyone could sense it. Judge Colton's patience was wearing thin. Daniel Hayes had dismantled witness after witness, weaponizing truth with surgical precision. The courtroom, once amused at his presence, now leaned into his every word. And Colton hated it. The judge adjusted his glasses, his expression cold and rigid. "Mr. Hayes, you've demonstrated passion, certainly. But passion is not precedent. And precedent is what this court respects. You want to prove you're a capable father? Then explain. Why should I overlook the undeniable evidence of financial hardship and instead believe a janitor can provide the best life for a child?" The words landed like blows. The attorney smirked again, seizing the chance to recover. "Exactly, Your Honor. My client can provide private schooling, healthcare, stability. Mr. Hayes offers nothing but empty promises." Rebecca sat smugly, arms folded, eyes filled with triumph. For her this was almost done. But Daniel didn't flinch. Slowly, he rose. His shoulders square but his voice low, deliberate. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking for justice. And justice doesn't measure a parent by their wallet but by their devotion." The judge's gavel struck lightly. "Rhetoric again, Mr. Hayes. The court requires more." Daniel inhaled deeply, then did something no one expected. He reached back into his briefcase, pulling out a worn notebook, pages frayed at the edges. He placed it gently on the desk before him. "This," he said, voice steady, "is my son's journal. We write in it together, every night. He writes about his day, his dreams, his fears, and I respond, page after page. Proof of a bond that no financial record can capture." The attorney leapt to his feet. "Objection. Irrelevant. This is sentimental nonsense." Daniel's reply was sharp, quick as lightning. "Objection, Your Honor, mischaracterization. Under Rule 401, relevance is defined as evidence having any tendency to make a fact more or less probable. This journal demonstrates the consistency of my role in my son's daily life. That is directly relevant to custody." The room gasped. Even the bailiff's eyes widened slightly. Daniel wasn't just defending himself. He was schooling them in law. Judge Colton froze, his hand hovering above the gavel. He studied Daniel with a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect. Finally, he said, "Proceed." Daniel opened the notebook, flipping to a page filled with crooked handwriting. "This is my son writing, Dad, I had a nightmare last night. You told me it was okay. And you stayed until I fell asleep. I'm not scared anymore." His voice softened, but it carried across the room like thunder. He turned another page. "Here he writes, Dad, when I grow up, I want to be strong like you. You never give up." The courtroom fell silent. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, his advantage evaporating with each word. Even Rebecca's confidence wavered, her eyes darting nervously toward the boy in the back. Daniel closed the notebook gently, his hands steady. "This is not sentiment. This is evidence. Evidence that my son feels safe, loved and guided. Evidence that presence matters more than privilege." The silence was suffocating. Then, from the back of the courtroom, Daniel's son stood. His small voice, trembling but determined, broke through the stillness. "He's telling the truth. My dad takes care of me. He always does." Gasps echoed. The guardian beside him tried to pull him back down, but the boy's words had already landed raw and unfiltered. The judge's gavel slammed. "Order, sit that child down immediately." But the damage was done. The boy's truth hung in the air heavier than any testimony. The spectators shifted uncomfortably, some visibly moved, others whispering in hushed awe. Daniel's throat tightened. But he didn't let emotion overtake him. He placed a protective hand on the notebook, his voice steady once more. Your Honor, you wanted proof beyond words. There it is. Straight from the one person this case is about. Judge Colton's face hardened, his pride under siege. For a moment, his jaw twitched, as though waging war with himself. Then he leaned back, his voice icier than before. This court will not be swayed by theatrics. Mr. Hayes, you've been clever, remarkably so. But cleverness will not save you from the weight of the law. The attorney seized the moment, his tone triumphant. Your Honor, I move that we dismiss this circus. Mr. Hayes has presented anecdotes, but the facts remain poverty, instability, reckless behavior. The child deserves more. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides. He knew what this was. The final push to bury him beneath the very system he had painstakingly studied. The judge wanted him silenced, the attorney wanted him crushed, and Rebecca wanted him erased from his son's life. But Daniel wasn't finished. He rose once more, his eyes locked on the judge. Your Honor, with respect, the law is not a weapon for the wealthy. It is a shield for the just. And I will not allow it to be twisted into something else. Not while my son's future hangs in the balance. The tension snapped like a taut wire. Colton's gavel slammed again, harder this time. That's enough. Tomorrow we reconvene. And tomorrow, Mr. Hayes, we will see just how deep your so-called legal genius truly runs. The courtroom emptied slowly, heavy with murmurs. Daniel gathered his papers, his son's eyes never leaving him. Pride and fear mingled in that gaze. The pride of seeing his father fight like a warrior, and the fear of what tomorrow might bring. Daniel slid the journal back into his case, his movements calm, deliberate. He knew the storm was only beginning. Tomorrow, the real test would come. Tomorrow, the judge would strike harder, and the attorney would claw deeper. And Daniel would have to summon everything he had left.